I do solemnly affirm.
In focus tonight, Salt Lake City Mayor Erin Mendenhall's first year in office. Today marks exactly 1 year since she was sworn in at her inauguration ceremony in the state's capital city. Since then, the city's experienced an endless year of chaos, from the COVID-19 pandemic, civil unrest to natural disasters. Mayor Mendenhall's experienced more in her first year in office than some mayors have in their entire career. Tonight, we are honored that she is sitting down in a live discussion with us tonight to look back at 2020. Mayor Mendenhall, it's great to have you here tonight. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Rosie.
Mayor, we'd like to start and briefly address what happened in Washington, D.C. today. Protesters storming the U.S. Capitol while Congress was convening to count the Electoral College votes. What was your first reaction to the news, and do you have any concerns that something like this could happen in Salt Lake City?
I think what has happened today is an abomination. It's a threat to our democracy, and it's exhibited the fragility of that democracy in a way that is heartbreaking to us as Americans. I'm really heartened that Congress is back at the work of the people and legitimizing the fair and just election that happened. And I do absolutely believe that democracy will prevail, and I think that here in Utah we'll be able to maintain, because cities maintain, cities keep it going. And that's something that I know that all of us want, is peace and an ability for us to transition in a peaceful way.
Thank you for letting us carve out some time to address that. Now let's get to the main focus of our discussion now, your first year in office. I don't even have the words to adequately describe the events that happened. You and I were talking earlier that it feels longer than a year since you were first campaigning for this position. If you could go back in time and talk to yourself 1 year ago today, what do you think you would have said to your younger self to prepare her for the upcoming year?
Well, I definitely think I was more than a year younger a year ago today than I am right now. But I would tell her to keep breathing and to get comfortable with the unknown, and that the volatility of the world, the volatility of society has been on clear display, but so has the natural environment. And what I've seen is the tenacity of the people of Salt Lake City and throughout the state of Utah, the tenacity to help each other and to keep going and to evolve and do it differently and do it better. So I think trusting our team to do that which they were hired to do. We have incredible professionals, and keep breathing, trust your team, keep getting up and loving Salt Lake City and going to work with that love in your heart.
Yeah, I'm very impressed at the momentum that all of us still have. So the COVID-19 pandemic has undoubtedly been one of the biggest focal points of 2020. Let's reflect on that first. What were some of the challenges that you faced as mayor with trying to get the spread of the virus under control? Is there anything you would have changed if you could go back in time? And what were the successes that we saw with the city's response?
Yeah, absolutely. The pandemic still is, as we've heard in your reporting even tonight, ravaging the people across this nation and parts of the world. And no city in the state of Utah has public health professionals. That is something that happens at the county, at the state level. So it's been difficult to navigate a pandemic without that skill set in our wheelhouse. But what we do have as the capital city is incredible community relationships, a small business and economic relationship at a broad level that works with us. And we have some of the best public servants in the nation working right here in our capital city. So we were able to get up and go. And we were able to do that before the federal administration was able to get any dollars out. We put $1.1 million into our small business community to help bridge that gap until it was available. We helped with our employees, revising really the way that they work on a day-to-day basis so that we never stopped our services. Even on earthquake day, all the garbage was picked up by the end of that day, and in the midst of a pandemic, and being able to get funding so that if our employees were exposed to COVID, or they needed to take care of a family member or child who was sick or had been exposed, we paid them to be able to take that time off before there was any federal money available. So there were a lot of wins. I think looking back on what we might do differently, I think we would have pushed harder from the outset on the state to rely on the hard data, which they eventually transitioned to in September, but not to go with that red, yellow, orange phase that lent in politics a little bit too much into the decision making, where we should have been relying on that data.
Now, these were just foreign waters that we were navigating, and I just felt like everyone from city, county, state just had different ideas on how to navigate this, right? And it's just, we really commend you for just trying to navigate those foreign waters as our city's leader. Mayor Mendenhall, hold that thought. We do have to take a quick commercial break, but when we return, we'll discuss racial equality, the Salt Lake City Police Department, and the September windstorm. Stay with us.
Outrage is understandable. I know that I haven't walked in your shoes, but I will walk with you. I hear you and I accept the work that's being asked of us. We have great work to do in the days and weeks and months ahead.
That was Salt Lake City Mayor Erin Mendenhall back in June, speaking in a public press conference after a clip was released from the body camera footage involving the fatal officer-involved shooting of Bernardo Palacios Carvajal. Thanks for staying with us for our second In Focus discussion tonight on Salt Lake City Mayor Erin Mendenhall's first year in office. In our last segment, we talked about the protests happening in D.C. right now, the COVID-19 pandemic, and the March earthquake. We pick up right where we left off. Mayor, thanks for staying with us. We'd like to move to the civil unrest in May. On a national level, we saw demonstrations explode across the country after George Floyd's death. And then on the local level, there was Palacio Carvajal's officer-involved shooting. What was your focus and line of thought in addressing the cries for change in the community?
Yeah, those days, weeks, and months that have followed George Floyd's killing brought our nation, I think, to a point where the more than 400 years of racism and oppression that has persisted came to a boiling over point, and we saw that on our city streets. And as a capital city, we've long hosted and even cherished the fact that this is Utah's front yard. It's where Utahns have come to exercise their First Amendment rights and gather and protest for as long as we've been here, really. And that's something that we hold dear. And it was a tragedy that on that particular day of the first protest, that after years of really peaceful, intentional protests around against inequity, that it was co-opted and it was turned into chaos by people who clearly had other motives at play that had nothing to do with George Floyd. In the months that followed, we saw hundreds of protests on the city streets, and it was an example really of the opening in our community and that we see across this nation to finally confront, finally begin to reconcile this inequity that has pervaded. And cities have an incredible amount of tools in our hands to change and make right what is not fair. That's from housing and zoning, access to fresh food and transportation. It's about childcare access. It's about investment by the city in communities. It's about access of those community members to capital. It's about growing our table in City Hall so that there's more voices, more representation there. I ran for change. I don't think there's ever been a more compelling time, at least in my lifetime, to be in elected office. And I truly welcome this opportunity, and I'm grateful that even as we meet right now, Salt Lake City's Commission on Racial Equity and Policing is meeting again, which they do regularly, and they're putting together changes as they analyze with our police department how we do policing in Salt Lake City.
And that's the thing, like throughout your first year in office, you've brought so many more people to the table in this conversation. I'd like to talk about something that's impacted you personally. Since the civil unrest became so violent and hostile at one point, law enforcement advised you and your family to spend some time out of the city at an unknown location because you were receiving death threats. How has events like that impacted you personally, mentally, and emotionally?
There's been a tremendous amount of good, believe it or not, in the year of 2020 in terms of the community support, altruism of neighbors supporting neighbors, and a lot of kind people, honest people, to reaching out to lend their support to me and my family. And that's what I stay focused on. I know from being on the city council for 6 years what that public discourse can look like, but I really believe that in every exchange, in every piece of feedback, that there is something that I need to hear. And so even when it is very difficult to hear, whatever that might be, I try to look at what the the root of that concern was and see what I can do to help. And I think that's what public service needs to do, and stop turning away from the vitriol and denying it and discounting it, but keep yourself safe, keep your family well, and then go work. And even if it's hard to listen, do the work of the people.
Yeah, it's a great reminder, though, that we have to have tough skin. And sometimes, the amount of negative voices are few, but they're loud, and the amount of positive voices are a lot, but sometimes we don't hear them all the time. So that's a great reminder for us. Real quickly, in September, we were hit with that damaging windstorm that toppled hundreds, maybe even thousands of trees and caused damage to homes all across the Wasatch Front. How did the city bounce back from that?
Oh, there were more than 3,000 trees that were taken out in that one-day storm just in Salt Lake City. About half of them were public trees. And it's heartbreaking, especially for a tree lover like myself who committed on the campaign trail to plant 1,000 extra trees on Salt Lake City's west side. And that we actually were able to achieve that this year. And in addition to that, after the windstorm, we created Retree SLC, and that's something, a website that's live. People can go there and make a donation to help us cover the cost of replacing those 1,500 public trees that were lost. It was a tragic day, especially to see that so many of our largest trees were taken out. But it also, again, showed the resiliency of Salt Lake City and the tenacity of our people and of our local government, with great ideas coming forward, coming together, and helping one another before our neighbors even helped themselves. I think homelessness is the most pressing and poignant issue in Salt Lake City today.
That was Salt Lake City Mayor Erin Mendenhall back in September, talking about prioritizing the issues surrounding homelessness. The mayor stated before that she believes homelessness is one of the most pressing issues in the city. Most recently in December, tensions flared when the county health department cleared encampments in the downtown area. This came after weeks of outreach from social workers, but advocates say these unsheltered residents are just being pushed from place to place. Welcome to the third segment of our In Focus discussion tonight on Mayor Mendenhall's first year in office. We resume our conversation with Mayor Mendenhall now. Mayor, another topic that our community members are passionate about is our homeless crisis, and I know there's so many elements to this issue. What would you say to those who feel that there's not enough resources, funding, and experts to help these individuals rehabilitate their lives?
I'd say they're right. They're right. And there need to be more resources. There need to be more shelter beds. There needs to be greater planning for winter shelter. And most of all, there needs to be more Utah leaders stepping up to this table and to this conversation. This is not a single city's issue, although as the nexus of services, which the capital city has been and will continue to be, we end up concentrating homeless individuals from throughout the state and even throughout the region right here in Salt Lake City, and have too many cities, too many counties turn their backs and not offer assistance where they should.
Now, as you mentioned before in our discussion, a lot of these issues are intertwined with each other. Speaking of affordable housing, it's becoming more and more expensive to live in Salt Lake City. Areas like Glendale, Rose Park, Ballpark, Poplar Grove, areas where it used to be affordable to live are becoming competitive now when it comes to real estate prices. What would you say to residents who feel like maybe they're being pushed out of the area because the cost of living is going up, or those who feel like these areas are becoming gentrified?
Salt Lake City needs, wants, and is committing resources over the last several years, ongoing revenue, to building affordable housing, because we know that healthy, successful communities are diverse communities. They're diverse economically, and they're diverse in many other ways. But when our workforce can't afford to live in our city, when our firefighters and our police officers, our teachers can't afford to have a home and a place to go that's in the city that they work in, that's not a healthy community. That's why Salt Lake City has committed sales tax revenue to investing with our private partners in getting more affordable houses out of that private market that is growing all over the state of Utah. And it's a commitment we're serious about, but it also has to be a diversity of housing types. We can't fit, and we're not focused on building single family homes in Salt Lake City. There just isn't the land for it. But the diversity of housing types, such as the tiny home consideration that our city council is making right now, that for the first time would legalize the construction of tiny homes in Salt Lake City. It's a very affordable size home for people at different age brackets. It allows them to live close to where they live, work, and play. And that's the kind of housing diversity that we have to have if we're going to actually build affordability into this capital city.
I know a lot of people are excited to see what comes out of the conversation about tiny homes. Let's move now to schools. The Salt Lake City School District was the only school district to start and be primarily online. Some of these schools have been offering some in-person learning from the beginning. And as you know, there is some controversy going on between like the bonus that the legislature is offering as well as whether or not the school district will go online. I know this is out of your hands. What do you make of all this? What do you think as far as what's going on?
I'm a mayor. I came from a city council. Before that, I came from nonprofits and community organizing. I know that communities have answers because they're closest to the people. And I believe in local government and local control. And I've heard our state talk about local control so many times. But when it comes down to it, watching a school district, a local school district, make decisions on their own at the local level based on the data of that area, the resources available, and frankly the vaccines, whether or not they're available, that's local control. And that's what the Salt Lake City School District has had the job to do, as districts across the state have. They've made a decision with the concentration of cases that we have seen in Salt Lake City to keep the schools closed so far. And it's disappointing to see the state legislature kick against that when so often they claim local control as their priority as well.
All right, we're enjoying our conversation with Mayor Mendenhall on the 1-year mark since she was sworn into office. We'll be right back after we take a quick commercial break. Welcome to our final In Focus segment tonight on Mayor Mendenhall's first year in office. We've covered a lot in the past half hour, from the COVID-19 pandemic to civil unrest and the homeless crisis. In our final discussion, we'd like to look towards the future. Mayor Mendenhall, it's been a reflective conversation. Thanks for being here to talk about this whirlwind of a year. Now we want to talk about the future and looking back at the past year. When you were running for mayor, you had several key issues that seemed to have taken a back seat because of more pressing issues. Specifically, you ran on the issues of air quality in the inland port. Where does your administration stand right now on those issues? What work has been done and what still needs to be done?
I think one of those silver linings of the surprises of 2020 is that the transition to teleworking and the clearing of the air that was undeniable, especially in those spring, cold beginning months of the pandemic, showed that we can make this transition. We can clear our air. We can work from home to the extent that some workers can. About half of Salt Lake City employees are frontline workers and didn't have that luxury. But those 1,500 or so other Salt Lake City employees, we were working at home within a matter of days. Praise to our IMS team. It was amazing. But we saw companies across the city, state, and the country make that same recognition. And as we ask our employees, this talk about going back, very few people want to go back to work the way exactly that it was. We've seen that productivity's remained high, and quality of life for our employees is higher as well. And so I think that the opportunity for us as an individual corporation, but also as we work with the rest of the economy around the city and the state, is to recognize what we have gained in the ability to telework, to keep our air clear, especially during the times when we know inversion is coming. We hear it on the weather, and we know that that pressure system is in. It's a great time for companies to say to their employees with an email, stay home over the next couple of red air days. We're going to telework, and that's a tool that we just didn't envision being possible. We're also working, as always, with our power provider and the contracts that we have there, trying to figure out how do we get affordable and renewable energy into Salt Lake City even faster. This year, we made some major improvements and announced the construction of a major solar project that's going to get 90% of Salt Lake City Corporation's energy transitioned to renewable by 2023, and it's a huge gain. So we're going to keep that throttle down for air quality because we definitely have the tools, we have the potential, and we've proven it this year.
And if there's anything we can take from the pandemic, it's that we have more tools to add to the toolbox with preserving our air quality. Yes. Now, many people have described your personality as calming, patient, and kind. Are there things that keep you up at night, and what keeps you going on the most difficult days?
Oh, to be sure, there's plenty that can keep me up at night. But I have an amazing family. I have an amazing husband, and I am really cognizant, I think as a lot of us are this year, of everything that we are blessed with that creates comfort and security in our lives, and my family is definitely the biggest piece of that. And I've been able to see them more this year than I did last year on the campaign trail and the years before that. So I've savored that, and I appreciate the kind sentiments, but we're all human. We're trying to get through this and trying to work with vulnerability as an asset, so that if we don't do something the way we really intended to today, I want to be able to turn around tomorrow and be that person and do that work in a better way. And that's what I practice.
Yeah, I think you and I are both human, and I think we do our best to show our good days, right, to the public and on camera, and then behind closed doors at home, you know, our hair's all messed up, we're eating a tub of ice cream on the really, really hard days. We are human, and you're so right when you say that. Looking ahead, what are going to be some of the areas of focus for you as mayor? What are some things you're going to take into 2021, and what can the residents of Salt Lake City expect from this year?
Yeah, we started a year ago today talking about 3 main priority focus areas. One is trying to get more good out of the growth that's happening. We don't want our city and our residents to be victims of the growth that's happening. It can be a wonderful thing, and that was my intention, to connect our residents with all the positive that we can from the growth that's happening here. Another piece is environmental resiliency and making sure that air quality and the environmental consequences of our decisions as a city, whether they're financial or policy or otherwise, are considered in every department and every division, and that's something we have executed this year. And then we want equity and we want inclusion. That was the 3rd pillar that we started with a year ago today, creating greater equity and inclusion for Salt Lake City. And then back at the beginning of the pandemic, in March, I asked the City Council, faced with the budgetary downturns that we were looking at, to still fund a citywide equity master plan. They did grant that money. We are going out to bid and about to go under contract with a third-party consultant to tell us how we can do better as a corporation in engaging our community, empowering our community, and working with our own employees in a more equitable way. So I do feel that we've been able to make some incredible strides, especially given the circumstances of 2020, in our original priorities. But I would add that taking care of our own employees has been made crystal clear as a critical piece of our every single day work as the Capital City Corporation. And that's a piece of the priorities that will be rolling into the evolution that we'll be talking about in the State of the City address in just a few weeks.
Mayor Mendenhall, unfortunately we are out of time, but we really appreciate you being on our show. Thank you so much for being here to talk about your first year in office. It was great to have you.
Thank you for having me.